So welcome to my session, Leveraging AI in the Research Process. I'm going to go ahead and share screen. Let's do screen 2. Okay, I'll wait for those slides to load. So I know you've been kind of inundated with so much information related to tools that you can take with you from our academy and implement in your classroom. I'm going to give you a few more. So I have a pretty high-level overview sketched out here on the second slide of agenda and objectives for today. It's a lofty agenda, but overall my goal for my afternoon session is to create room for collaboration, critical dialogue, and space to reflect about how to integrate these AI tools, particularly as it relates to the research process for use in the classroom. So while my examples may reference more upper level college academic research, I hope that you are able to find that these tools are actually really relatable to student research that might be produced in your classrooms. So if at any point you do have questions, or if you want to know more about either a concept or a tool, please feel free to stop me or put in the chat any questions that you have. I'll keep the chat ups open so I can see any reflections that may be dropped in there. But yeah, again, if you do have any questions at any point, please let me know. I had an icebreaker to kick us off this session, but I want to be respectful of the agenda because we did take a little bit longer in our wonderful conversation this morning. We'll probably skip the one that I have planned for today, but we'll start with kind of getting to know me a little bit more, who I am and why I'm offering this session today. And then we'll dive into the meat of our presentation, which the first section will kind of talk about bias and discrimination in AI and machine learning. So we'll explore, understand how bias and discrimination can be manifested in these tools, but how to dissect these various sources of bias in AI, and then talk about some strategies, tools, and best practices for reducing bias in our research. And then in the next section, we'll talk about how to leverage AI technology during the research process. So we'll talk about some advantages and shortcomings to some of the AI tools optimized for academic research at different levels of the research process. And when we get to that section, I'll indicate at what point we're actually focusing on of the research process. And then we'll close out today by talking about some ethical considerations with respect to AI. How do we combat plagiarism in the writing process particularly, and talk about the importance of transparency and accountability with utilizing AI in research. So like I mentioned, I wanted to spend some time introducing myself a little bit more. I know I spoke yesterday with Michelle on our presentation on digital citizenship. So you may remember that I am a research analyst here at IDRA. I've been with the organization for about 2 years, but I've worn several hats during my time here at IDRA. So I was first introduced to the organization as a master's level student at UT Austin during the pandemic. So in the spring semester of 2020, I applied to be a research evaluation intern here at the organization, and I fell in love with the mission. I fell in love with the work, and so I looked for more opportunities to stay engaged. During that year, there was also a Policy Fellows program that had just started, that IDRA had started for the first year, that I decided to apply to, and I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into how to bridge policy advocacy and research. And so through that fellowship, I learned a lot about what I was not interested in doing with respect to our work. And so I found my sweet spot as a research evaluation specialist. And so I applied to be research analyst. And here I am today working on bridging projects. I like to think of myself as the astronaut at the organization. I live in many spaces, but my sole purpose is to connect and mediate ideas. And I'm also really enveloped in our digital equity work and research. So I get to work really closely with Michelle, Hector, Liz, and other colleagues who are interested in expanding and advancing our research and advocacy in this space. I think I might have mentioned already that I'm a third-year doctoral student at UTSA in applied demography. This summer, I'm actually taking my comprehensive exams so I can start writing my dissertation this last year. So I'm really thrilled about that. But a lot of what I do at my research for school is informed by the work that I get to do professionally. So I just feel really privileged that I get to live in both spaces at once, and how beautifully those spaces of my life intersect. So you'll notice that I put there my educational background is actually in psychology and quantitative methods in the education space. So I kind of view my research as multidisciplinary in a sense that I like to bridge different theoretical understandings and research applications to my own research. And so what I share with you is through that lens with a specific focus on social justice and equity. And then just a little bit more personal information about myself. You probably gathered that I am a coffee, tea, and yoga lover from our previous session, Liz's introduction. But I did want to share that one of my current obsessions is hot on-it yoga. If you've never heard about hot on-it yoga, or have been interested in trying yoga but aren't interested in the traditional approach, you might be interested in something called hot on-it yoga, which kind of is a more intense version, but it got me sweating, I will tell you that. It is a very hard activity, and that's what I really love about yoga, is it constantly not just challenges your body, but your mind as well. And I'm a really huge music lover, so I am going to share my recommendation of the month, Yaritza y su Ciencia, a wonderful Mexican group out of Washington State, actually, but the lead singer, Yaritza, has a beautiful voice, so if you're interested in learning more about that band, check them out. And if you ever want musical recommendations, generally, I'm your girl. But we'll get into it today. So we're going to skip our activity, but if you are interested about what that activity was about, it was actually on the 4th through 6th panels of the Jamboard. So if you still want to participate just offline in an asynchronous way, check those panels out. But we'll dive into the meat of our discussion. So the first section, we're going to be discussing how to confront bias and discrimination in AI and machine learning. So some of the key concepts are listed here. Primarily, what do we mean by bias in AI and ML is what we'll talk a little bit more about how it differs from human bias. So bias in AI and ML refers to kind of the skewed or discriminatory outputs that can be generated from an AI or ML system, and it generally stems from the data that was used to train the system or formulate the algorithm results themselves. So some training of data can be unrepresentative of the whole population, and if it reflects any existing human prejudices, the systems can learn and reproduce these biases. And this differs from human bias, right, which can be a conscious or unconscious preference against or for an individual or group. But human bias can often be seen or perpetuated through personal beliefs, experiences, interactions with people. But AI bias can generally just be looked at as a result of the data that it's been trained on. However, it's really important to understand how this can be perpetuated, because it can have a really significant impact for marginalized groups and in the way that we use generated information in these systems to either expand our own thinking, to generate future research. So again, it can have real world impacts that, if not taken seriously or if not considered on this meta evaluation level, it can lead to kind of a sustaining or perpetuation of these biases. So for example, if an AI system in hiring is biased against women or people of color, it could lead to fewer job opportunities for these groups. Another common example of this is facial recognition systems being less accurate for people with darker skin tones or maybe ethnic features. So it can lead to misidentification or false accusations, particularly in the policing space or the kind of justice involved individuals. So in essence, these biased AI systems can reproduce, can amplify existing inequalities that can affect decisions in these critical areas like research, like hiring, policing, policy, all sorts of arenas. Perpetuating these systems, it produces risks that are of significant concern. So the takeaway here is just that these systems do depend on vast amounts of data to generate these algorithms, these predictive models, but they can impact the kind of information that are generated. And so it's important to be aware, and it's important to regularly check for bias when generating responses. Take the time to interpret what information is being produced by the AI tool. Recognize that transparency and interpretability in these resources are just an important facet to using them. So know that the way that you engage by what language you're using are crucial components in understanding and mitigating bias. And then I can pause here if there are any questions that kind of come up, or maybe some ideas. Oh, I see in the chat here.
I just want to correct it. It was this was an episode of The Good Wife, but they were reflecting like a real issue of algorithms being biased. And I don't know if anybody watched The Good Wife, but the company was called Chum Hum, and they were rerouting drivers away from these like quote unquote unsafe neighborhoods, but it was negatively affecting business owners. But apparently, like, it was based on or worse. I don't want to like put Google Maps on the mention that it was from the show, but then I remember it was based on real life.
Put them in the hot seat. Oh, thank you, Agechi. That's a really good point too. And I thought when you were talking about that a little bit about how some AI predictive models might be deficit based in a sense. So kind of pointing out what's missing in amongst particular populations, or what's missing from neighborhoods. And so I think another kind of important thing to remember, going back to our discussion earlier this morning about how AI can not replace the human element. So human researchers are really good at being asset-based in terms of the lens in which they can seek new information and produce new information. Not all researchers, but those definitely in the social justice space view populations and groups of people and neighborhoods through an asset lens. And so that's another important element to research, humans involved in research. And so not a replacement, but definitely a tool. But thank you so much for sharing, Ogechi. The one thing I just wanted to leave here, our discussion, is that, education is really key to understanding and addressing these biases. It not only involves the technical education on how these systems work, which is a really important reason why we invited Dr. Redfield to speak on kind of these the intricacies on how it's developed and how it's used, because the back end knowledge is really important, but education in terms of the societal and ethical implications of AI are really important to consider. So through education, we can really ensure that creating and implementing these AI systems understand the potential for bias and how to prevent it, can empower users like ourselves, can empower our constituents like our students, our partners, our collaborative thinkers, policymakers, to understand, question, challenge these unfair biases that can be embedded in some of these AI systems. So we're going to take a bit of break in terms of conversation and me talking and hear from this really cool group called code.org that Michelle actually introduced me to. They're a really great group that develop resources and tools for educators like yourselves and kind of bridging these high level concepts to students. And so I wanted to take a moment and share this video with you about training data and bias, to talk a little bit more about how training data can affect the predictive models that we see. And I'm going to stop sharing and reshare because I am concerned I didn't share sound at first. So let's try it this way. Okay. Here we are. Go ahead and play the video for us. Oops. I clicked away. Here we go.
Machine learning is only as good as the training data you put into it. So it's super important to use high quality data, and lots of it. But if data is so important, it's worth asking, where does training data come from? Often, computers are collecting training data from people like you and me without any effort on our part. A video streaming service might keep track of what you watch, then it can recognize patterns in that data to recommend what you might want to watch next. Other times, you're directly asked to help, like when a website asks you to spot street signs and photos. You're providing training data to help a machine learn to see, and maybe even one day drive. Medical researchers can use medical images as training data to teach computers how to recognize and diagnose diseases. Machine learning needs hundreds and thousands of images and training direction from a doctor who knows what to look for before it can correctly identify disease. Even with thousands of examples, there can be problems with the computer's predictions. If X-ray data is only collected from men, then the computer's predictions may only work for men. It may not recognize diseases when asked to diagnose the X-ray of a woman. This blind spot in the training data creates something called bias. Bias data favors some things and deprioritizes or excludes others. Depending on how training data is collected, who is doing the collecting, and how the data is fed into the computer, there is a chance that human bias is included in the data. By learning from biased data, the computer may make biased predictions. This can happen whether the people training the computer are aware of it or not. So when you are looking at training data, ask yourself 2 questions. Is this enough data to accurately train a computer? And does this data represent all possible scenarios and users without bias? This is where you, as the human trainer, can play a crucial role. It's up to you to give your machine unbiased data. That means collecting tons of examples, often from lots of different sources. Remember, when you pick and choose data for machine learning, you're actually programming the algorithm using training data instead of code. The data is the code. The better the data you provide, the better the computer will learn.
So I thought that was a good introduction to describing how bias can be kind of perpetuated or mitigated in AI training. I think it was the first day of our academy that Michelle had mentioned that we're currently training this AI, these AI tools, with the input that we drop into it. And so we can serve as, good Samaritan, good researchers, good data producers when we interact with these interfaces. And so asking really good questions or setting up context are really helpful to training data in a more refined, inclusive, and equitable way. And so we'll talk a little bit about what that could look like when you're using it in a research perspective. But I just wanted to show this video as a start to the introduction. I had one more short clip that I wanted to share that talks about equal access and algorithmic bias, because code.org can explain it better than I can, and you'll get to hear from some students themselves about kind of how they've encountered it in their own lives. It may help you to think a little bit more about how these biases can actually impact the way students engage with their learning.
No matter what field you end up going into, it's quite likely that AI is going to have some impact on what you're doing.
The potential for AI to help society is enormous.
It's something that is influencing a lot of very important decisions about real humans and their lives.
It could be used in education to be more of an equalizer between people. It could be used in healthcare to develop new drugs. It could be used in science to develop new technologies.
And like any technology, its application will depend on how it is utilized.
And at the same time, we need to think about the risks that are associated with doing that.
The consequences are huge.
The kind of artificial intelligence technology that really dominates the applications we're seeing today is machine learning. Machine learning depends entirely on the information that you feed it.
The problem is that with real-world data, there's often information in there that you didn't intend to be in there, but is captured because of the bias in the data collection process.
So if you're building an AI to determine who gets a home loan or who should be charged with a crime, it could definitely bubble up the racial biases that humans and our current society already does.
A lot of what it means to build less harmful AI is really systems that are including the perspectives of those that are most vulnerable or most marginalized, most likely to be hurt by the deployment of that system.
In many ways, I've worried that the people who are particularly vulnerable to AI are the people who are already underprivileged in many respects.
Most people in the world just have AI applied to them rather than playing an active role in guiding what AI gets applied to.
Everybody you know has a computer in their pocket. That's young people, old people, rich people, poor people. To me, that's actually quite exciting from a democratization of technology perspective. It means that AI, powerful as it is, could theoretically be in everybody's pockets, benefiting everybody.
We should strive to make sure that things that provide value for society can be reached to anybody.
How do we give a greater voice to the people who are being impacted by AI to in turn be able to turn around and impact how AI is used for them?
Every time when you're looking at a new problem, you have an opportunity to change the world. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't, but we always try.
It's really critically important that we have as many diverse perspectives as possible influencing the development of AI. We need the participation of more women, more people of color, to provide a different perspective and a different lens on which problems matter and how we should approach these problems.
So again, I think these videos are really great in outlining kind of what happens on the back end, how we should be thinking about these systems more fundamentally with respect to bias and algorithmic bias. But I think the important takeaway for me as a researcher, as an AI user, is how can I challenge that as I'm using the tools? It's a bit above my pay grade to kind of influence AI from this back end development perspective, but I think it's important to know how it all works so we can be more effective users, but also challenge and have these challenge these ideas and have these conversations with our students so that we can be more critical thinking in terms of how we interact with these interfaces, but also how to be critical consumers of the research and the data that it does give us when we request it. I'm putting in the chat a link to a book that if you're interested in learning more about these concepts, it's called Race After Technology by Dr. Ruha Benjamin. I'm also dropping the kind of abstract for the book. It's a really great dialogue about kind of how racism is embedded in some of these internet-based technologies. So if you're interested in learning more about this as a concept, as a topic, I definitely encourage this book here. I will be offering a lot of recommendations this session, so bear with me. But I did want to take a moment to kind of engage in a community discussion of a little bit more about this and hear from you all about your thoughts. So I posed some questions here, but we can take the conversation however we see fit. So I did post, what are some strategies we can adopt to mitigate bias in AI and machine learning? How can we encourage active participation in these discussions, especially with our students? And then, what are some effective ways to promote diversity and inclusion in AI research and development? How can we incorporate these strategies into our current practices? So you can give a moment if anyone has any ideas that they want to share.
Hi, this is Liz. If I had a magic wand, I'd find money to be able to give discussions like this or presentations like what we've been doing the past couple of days to those Title I schools across the nation or, across Texas, giving them access to it. First of all, we need the technology piece too, the hardware piece, but getting these presentations and hands-on to the teachers that need it the most, with our kids who need it the most in those marginalized communities. Are we in Harlem in New York? Are we in the the south suburbs in Chicago, like really making sure that our students who are not doing well in a lot of these areas get first access to it. And then, continued PD and continued access is so beneficial.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Liz. Anyone else have any ideas that they wanted to share, maybe questions that came up for them as they were listening to some of this information?
Bringing as many students into the conversations as possible, like giving them access to this information. The examples in the code.org video of, like what can happen when bias, or when things go wrong, basically, and having them really be a part of that conversation, because this is our world now. I think is really key.
Definitely, yeah. Including, I think, especially the students who are using these tools, right, understanding the implications of them, they're only going to get more advanced. So hearing from students about how to, their idea about solutions is also important too. So thank you so much, Ogechi.
Hi, this is Roya, and I think we need to inform and involve educators. And in addition to that, there is no specific guideline or framework, especially when we are talking about ethical consideration in AI. We need to have this kind of guideline to follow. So we need to develop guidelines and framework. And in addition to that, we need to align AI model to our shared learning vision to keep learners and students in the center, following the guidelines.
Thank you so much, Roya. I was writing down what you had said. It kind of sparked some ideas for me in terms of how we can help to have collective voice and impacting the way that some of these guidelines are developed. I wasn't going to talk about this in my presentation, but I'll share this with you in the chat and then on the Padlet, so maybe it'll spark some ideas and conversation for yourself. But the federal government recently came out with a blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. And so what you were saying, Roya, about how educators can be a really strong and important voice in helping to develop guidelines for AI to keep learners at the center is extremely important, right? Because the federal bill or the federal guidelines that had come out are definitely more industry focused, but I think there's a ripe opportunity for advocates and educators to align with respect to creating recommendations or developing recommendations to make sure that learners are protected, when we're under these guidelines. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Any other thoughts?
And I think 2 days ago, there was a webinar by the U.S. Department of Education based on the recent report that was released in May 23. And this is actually, one of their concerns to have this type of guideline, because I'm looking for the available guideline or standards for K through 12 teachers or even in the higher education. And so that is actually one of the recent reports. That is very comprehensive to me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really that's some fascinating information. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. And I can put the link in the chat box in case needed.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I think as we're moving forward and how to kind of, again, situate ourselves as advocates in this space, this is a really cool opportunity to collaborate. So thank you so much, Roya.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, y'all. If you have any other ideas, please, I invite you to come off mute or put it in the chat. I scheduled a bit of a break time in here, but in the interest of time, I hope you all are okay with breezing by a 5-minute break and jumping into the next section. Unless you really need one, feel free to just hop out, out of the call whenever you need. But we'll kind of move on to talking about how to leverage AI technology throughout the research process. So we can kind of define the research process in several ways. You've seen it as like a 5, a 6, an 8-step sort of process that's iterative. This is just one example of how to kind of conceive the research process, from defining the topic through narrowing it down, gathering the relevant information, workshopping ideas and theses, finding and evaluating sources, citing those sources, writing the paper. That's kind of a traditional way of imagining the research process. Today, we're going to kind of focus on about 4 different areas of the research process, but particularly 3. I'll talk about data analysis as a way how to use AI within that space, but we'll really focus on the 3 main ones: identifying the problem, evaluating the literature, and report writing. So if we're imagining the research process as this 8-step process, all the way from identifying the problem all the way to report writing, we're going to kind of live in this space here from start to finish, kind of not really looking at the interim, but again, there are many tools that are designed to help those particular stages of the process. But I think what will be really useful to you as educators is focusing on those first and last steps of the research process. So I really wanted to spend some time talking about this idea of incremental prompting. I know we in subsequent, or I should say previous sessions, have talked about kind of how to engage in prompting, what are kind of best practices. Well, with respect to the research process, you can kind of boil down this idea of prompting to this like 5-step way of engaging with the AI. This is derived from a really cool social media presence, this academic who has created many blog posts about not just incremental prompting, but a little bit more about these AI tools, how to integrate them into your work. His name is Dr. M. Bilal. He's at a university in India. And so I linked some of his blog posts into the Padlet. So if you're interested in reading any of those, they define incremental prompting a little bit more nuanced, and he also talks a lot about some resources that are useful and engaging throughout the research process. But I'm going to focus on just a few today, but I wanted to spend time talking about incremental prompting with respect to research. So when you're engaging with a research project for the first time, you kind of start with trying to develop your idea, right? So how do you take this topic and generate a research question that I can then kind of establish an understanding around the literature, kind of refine my questions to kind of engage in the research process in terms of data collection, analysis, and so on and so forth. You can start first with inquiry. Breaking down inquiry, these 5 steps, has been really helpful for me as a student. So as you've seen before, we've used ChatGPT a lot throughout the academy. You can use other sources like these listed here, but we can start the process of inquiry with a single prompt that can then increase in complexity. For example, if we're interested in learning more about student mental health, we can ask a broad question about what is the research around student mental health as of June 15th, 2023. I will note that some of these AI tools only have in their repository data collected up until the point of 2021. So it's always good to remember the limitations of the data itself that's available in some of these AI systems. So you can double check that just doing a quick Google search by seeing up to what point is this data available for the AI to be using. So again, you can begin with a single prompt like student mental health and ask about what research is kind of most cited or maybe more relevant in the space, and then increase in complexity about that search. Maybe you want to learn about student mental health from the K through 12 perspective, or more specifically first grade or second grade students, or maybe you want to define your population as those with visual learning disabilities. So you can use the single prompt and start increasing in complexity so that you can have a more refined search to start off with. The next step is to kind of establish context. Again, these tools they rely on input from the user. So if you're interested in learning about a very specific subpopulation or a specific topic, establishing context for the AI will be really helpful in trying to set the scene for what data it's producing for you, or what information it's generating for you. So for example, if you're trying to develop a research, sorry, okay, I saw some chat information to the Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. Thank you so much, Ogechi, and thank you, Roya, to dropping the report link. Appreciate that. So establishing context is really important. So in some AIs, you can actually drop in PDF articles or journal articles that you want to know more about, or maybe that it has a certain perspective on research that you are trying to get the chat to start generating certain research questions that align with this perspective. Establishing context, the inputs that are going into the AI will only serve to refine what results you're looking for. You can spend some time explaining the topic in more detail. So for example, student mental health is an extremely large umbrella. Maybe you want to focus on self-confidence. Maybe you want to focus on autonomy and how that relates to self-confidence or self-efficacy. And so you can use the context and explanation of the topic to really, again, guide the AI resource to specify what results it's generating. The other thing that is important during this inquiry process is specifying the task in which you are asking the AI to produce or generate these results. So having refined directions is really important. I think Hector and Michelle have done a really great job with explaining how to do that through their sessions. So I would definitely look back to those sessions to learn more about how to specify a task. But again, asking follow-up questions is also really important, right? Digging a little bit deeper, not just taking what is generated at face value, but digging deeper to find more nuanced perspectives about the information that's generated will be really helpful during this inquiry process as you're refining the research proposal. And this, again, is going to be a really vital tool or strategy for students as they're engaging with these research topics for the first time, if that's what they're doing in the classroom. So I did want to drop in the chat a couple of resources that would be helpful in your quest. One of them is that Dr. Bilal's blog post about incremental prompting. Let's see if I can get to it quick enough. Have it in the run of show document, or maybe on the Padlet. So if you want to look at the Padlet after the session, it's there. But this one is a really great blog post about how to engage in incremental prompting. It's kind of a prompting 101. And it takes you through an example of a literature project. So I've dropped that in the chat there. Again, it's the takeaway here is that the more specified and more refined your inquiry is, the better results it's going to produce and the better direction you're going to get with your research project. Okay, so on the right-hand side of this slide, I know it's a lot of information, but really it's just explaining tools that are beyond ChatGPT for leveraging in academic research. So chat is really great for broader inquiry and topic selection, research question development, because it links broad concepts, it can summarize them very well, and it can really help create basic outlines for articles, reports that you're writing. So it's really great for like the first and final steps of the process from a more introductory perspective. But there are other really great tools that are going to be really helpful for either you who are engaging in the research or your students. So Two that I really like are Consensus and Elicit.org. So Consensus can be used as like a Google Scholar or a search engine for investigating research articles that are out there. So Consensus is likely to help you if you're trying to investigate relationships between concepts and presents research that is relevant to those concepts. The only drawback here is that Consensus has information about 6 topic areas, so social policy being one, medicine, mental health, health and physical health and health supplements, economics, and sleep. So it does have some shortcomings with respect to what content areas it expands, but again, it's a really good tool for kind of linking articles together, relevant articles together. Elicit.org, I think, does a better job in terms of comparing and contrasting these resulting papers, and can even suggest research questions related to the topic of interest. So again, if your students are in the stage of inquiry, this might be helpful when they're trying to develop a literature review or come up with more refined questions of themselves for their project. Another tool is Cite AI, which really gets to the point of combating plagiarism and how to support your claims using cited articles, citable publications. So that's another great tool. Another one is Research Rabbit. It organizes academic papers into what are called collections and can prompt relevant recommendations for users. Research Rabbit, I think, is on a more advanced level for more either upper secondary education or even college education. But I think it's a really great tool if, again, you're trying to integrate these academic sources into a single space that helps you to kind of brain map. And then what I think is going to be one of your favorite tools, if you've not heard about it already, is Chat PDF. This tool allows you to read and analyze journal articles or any PDF articles by simply uploading them to the tool. I wanted to spend time looking at this tool together and also Consensus, because these are really powerful tools that might be helpful to you or your students. So we'll take a moment. I'll stop sharing my screen, my presentation slide deck, and hop on over to Chat PDF. Huge fan of Chat PDF. Okay, share my screen, and hopefully you're seeing kind of this purple browser here. It's loading. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what Chat's PDF interface looks like when you first get to it. You can see that you can create an account, so it'll save Chat history. Luckily for me, it has, my history here with some of the articles I was reading for my mortality and health class recently this semester. But if you scroll down, it'll give you some ideas on how to use the tool. So if you're a student, it'll tell you, you can actually upload textbook chapters, handouts, presentations, so that you don't have to spend so much time flipping through these tools or these resources themselves, and instead you can interact with it in a more collaborative way using Chat PDF. You can use it for work if you're trying to use something, for like a business proposal, a grant proposal for our participant who's doing that. You can use this article or this tool to help you kind of filter through information that might be necessary for you to synthesize or to metabolize for your own use. And you can also just use it for any document that you're interested in. Poetry, literature, all sorts of different resources it can handle. And it can understand any language or preferred language that you want. So it's a very robust tool in that sense for language. So I'll just kind of use an academic journal article because it's up here first. So this was a recent article that I read for a class. It even shows you a preview of the article, which is super powerful. So this one was discussing the impacts of divorce, repartnering, and step families on children's and adults' health. So I dropped the PDF in the chat. You can also just upload it through your file directory, but you can just do a drag and drop. And then it allows you to ask it questions. So it even gives you it generates some example questions at the start For example, what are some of the factors that have contributed to the decline in remarriage rates, and so on and so forth. So I tried it out. I wanted to know what it would produce here. Oh, sorry, Michelle, did you have a question? Or maybe that was my echo.
I'm just like in awe of everything. And I was just reading that Twitter post over again, and I'm like, oh my God. So no, but keep going. This is amazing.
Sure. I think I was just hearing my echo. So I asked it, right, what are some of the factors that have contributed to the decline in remarriage rates? And it tells me, according to this article, so that's the one drawback of this particular tool, is it doesn't consider other material that is available relevant to the material that you're looking at. It's only specified to this article that you've fed it. But that could also be a really helpful tool if you're just trying to do a kind of a deep dive into the resource. So according to the article, remarriage rates have declined in recent years, but the overall proportion of marriages that are remarriages is rising. The article does not provide specific factors that have contributed to this trend. So then I asked it questions about main research question. It offered me its take on that. It even talked about research aims. I asked about key arguments made by the researchers. So it allowed me to understand what the perspectives are for the people who were writing the article, not just what the article was saying, but it took into consideration perspective and even implications for future research. It listed out key findings for me. It offered key strengths about the article. So you can even ask about limitations to the article or the resource. You can ask about future research. Again, a really robust tool if you're wanting to kind of interact with a resource in a more in a deeper way without having to just simply read it and go through all that information. So if you're someone like me who is consuming tons of information at any given point, which I know you are, you're educators, it's an extremely robust tool to kind of get the meat of the article without spending an hour and a half reading word for word what's on there. So again, that's Chat PDF. This resource is linked to several places, so I'll kind of save the link in the chat unless you've already y'all are making me laugh in your chat. But I won't link it right now because I do want to keep it mind of time. But again, it's posted in several spaces. The other one I wanted to show you was consensus. So allow me to reshare my screen and show you that tool. Again, I could spend probably a whole other session going through some of these other tools that I find fascinating, but I think this one will do. And actually, I'm going to pause my share because I had some pre-generated questions to save us some time. So I had a question that I developed. It was, how does do students with how does training in technology use impact students' self-efficacy and their academic performance? This is a really refined research question at this stage, but I wanted to see what it would produce for me. So it actually comes up with it prompts you, right? Oh, do you want to talk about these kind of relevant research questions? Can fish oil help with depression? Is soy healthy? So on and so forth. But I wanted to see if it would actually take a refined research question. So you drop that in the chat, again, like a Google search. It sifts through all sorts of academic articles to help you determine what could be useful to you in your research. So here are some top hits of articles. What's really cool about this tool, it shows you which ones are highly cited. Again, the idea is like through consensus in this academic space, which articles are really highly cited, supported by other researchers, by the kind of overall literature. So it'll tell you by these kind of key tags here. And so you can sift through the articles that it presents to you kind of like a Google Scholar. But there's this tool called Synthesize, which allows you to see what the AI gleans from synthesizing these results. And there's that, kind of note about it not being 100% accuracy to use with discretion. But again, it shows you that the overall consensus of the top papers that were analyzed and whether or not that these claims are supported. So that's a tool. If you click on, let's say, this highly cited one, these findings lend support to training programs for students, click on it. And you can see, again, the abstract of the material, the author, and then you can use it. You can use the tool to share these findings to yourself or to other people. You can cite the source based on these different citations. You can look at the full text, what journal it's in. So again, it's just another way to kind of interact deeper with the literature, but get some more ideas about what is the overall consensus out there in the academic space about these topics. And I'm going to take a look at the chat. Oh, yay, Dr. Redfield, glad you can join us. We're talking about two tools that might be helpful to those kind of interacting with the research process. One of them was Chat PDF, and the other is Consensus, but they're all going to be linked to the Padlet and then other materials I produced for today's presentation.
Christina, I don't know if you already mentioned it, but those two are free? I know the Chat PDF is, but both the Consensus is also?
Yes, so these are free tools. I don't know if Consensus has a paid version. So I don't want to give you false information, but they are free when you're interacting with them. And to my knowledge, they haven't given me any limits so far. And I've been using Chat PDF for some time. And it hasn't said, oh, you're kind of hit your limits. So that's good news, because I think that will be one of the most useful tools for our educators and students.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. I'm going to go ahead and reshare my slides and kind of get back to it, because there is an exciting activity I wanted to try with you all. Share screen. Okay. I wish I had more time to kind of go through these other tools, but they're here for you to kind of investigate on your own time and maybe even through the activity. But if you have questions about how these tools might be most useful, I did kind of provide like a bit of an overview of what the tool does and kind of the strengths of them. Okay, so I wanted to kind of close out with talking about kind of not just the benefits and challenges of using AI tools in research, but how do we combat plagiarism in the writing process? So as we know, these tools can really bring significant advantages to us generally, but for sure in the research process, they handle really vast amounts of data. They can identify patterns and relationships that we may be missing, not just because we're human, but maybe we're just interacting with these subject areas or these topics for the first time. And so we don't really know the breadth of the research, right? This can really enhance not just the efficiency, but the effectiveness of the research, opening up new possibilities and directions for this iterative process. I think the short that Liz shared in her session was really helpful. It can advance research in such a way that human touch will be unable to do. However, there are challenges and risks associated with using AI tools, and I think we'd be remiss to not talk about it. Hopefully we've done a good job about talking about it throughout the academy, but I just want to remind us that these systems can perpetuate, amplify bias if they're trained with biased data. So that's important to recognize that there's data privacy security concerns when using these tools. So sharing that with your students becomes really important in discussing the ethical practices with AI research. So there's definitely this need for balance between speed and convenience and using these tools, but the necessity for ethical research practices as well. I guess we can leave here this discussion by kind of talking about the kind of ways in which we can mitigate those concerns, right? We talked a lot about this in our digital citizenship presentation yesterday, but I just want to remind you all that bringing students into the fold, into these discussions, is going to be critical in helping them to mitigate these kind of ethical concerns, particularly plagiarism. If they're using these tools like we know they are for things like homework or assignments at home, how can we as educators help to instruct them to use them for tools for understanding rather than tools for reproduction, right? Not just copying the answers, but really becoming engaged and active learners who not just arrive at an answer, but understand the process and the implications of the response or the result. I think also sharing what constitutes as plagiarism and why it can be harmful is a really important discussion to have with students as early on as possible, especially if they're engaging in the research process for the first time in the school space. And having, separate time to talk about the different types of plagiarism that exist and why it's important to cite researchers and authors with proper citation would be really important as well. And it can help to mitigate any sort of plagiarism that can happen in the writing process. The other thing is really introducing them to plagiarism checker tools early on and let them know that you're using them as an educator to help grade their work, but also for them to see, okay, to help them challenge their thinking about what can I be using from this generated response as an outline, or maybe as like a way to help me start writing versus the word for word production of the AI tool. So having these discussions really early on about proper citation techniques and paraphrasing and citations is really important to just not only advancing their research skills, but really, again, helping them to be better consumers and producers of research. And there's other tips here available for you that we talked a lot at length yesterday. The one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about was this idea about idea mapping with AI to generate or to promote original thinking. So there's one resource I wanted to put on your radar from commonsense.org that actually links to several apps and websites that would be helpful for having those types of exercises in your classroom. Again, encouraging students to do this sort of workshopping ahead of time before introducing AI in the process can be really helpful for them to generate questions that they're not just curious about, but can help them to have a really refined understanding of the topics that they're curious about and researching. So this was this graphic that I wanted to show you all about the inquiry process that might be helpful when thinking about how to set up exercises for students and could be helpful during the idea mapping phase of inquiry. So posing real questions. What do they know already? What do they want to know? How do they feel about these topics? What resources have I already looked at that I haven't looked at? Who's responsible for producing this information? How do I know it's accurate? How do I know it's trustworthy? And then when you get to these processes, or this kind of the third and fourth steps of the process, interpreting this information, kind of at a meta-analysis level, like we talked about several times over the course of the academy, how do we become critical consumers of the production or the generation of the AI tools by probing a little bit deeper? How is this relevant to my question? What parts support what I want to know? What perspectives are not being considered? How is bias being introduced to these responses? Would be really helpful, and again, encouraging students to use AI as a tool, not a replacement for their work. Okay, so I didn't leave a ton of time for this activity because I spoke a little bit longer than I should have, but I still want to try to do this activity if time is right, and maybe Michelle, Liz, you can help me be time checkers. But I designed a bit of a group activity so we can start practicing these tools and see how they might be useful in our work. So I'm going to link to in the chat a document that's view only, so you don't feel like you need to edit it in any way. But this activity is designed for you all to work in collaborative groups to test these tools out. So I'll go ahead and share my screen one more time to look at the document together, and then maybe Michelle, if you have the capacity to help me generate some breakout rooms, probably of 2 or 3. To engage in this activity. But this activity is called AI Expedition. I have 4 objectives listed here, but we're going to kind of divide and conquer. So the goal is to use some of these resources to meet the objectives, either through incremental prompting or to synthesize academic articles. We won't be doing the last 2, the analyzing qualitative data, although that's a really cool discussion if you want to have it at a different time, how chat can be used to do that. And then the research report refinement, we won't do that because I don't have a report to actually feed. Unless you do and want to try it in your group, you can decide. But once we get into those small breakout rooms, you can read through this document, and we don't have to do the one slide presentation because that'll take too long. We'll probably just have a more organic discussion about takeaways. The links to the resources are here, and the scenarios for each objective is listed. I'm not going to assign what scenario. I'll invite you to kind of talk amongst each other about what objective you want to try to exercise so that you can play around with the resources. But I will stop talking and allow you to have some fun.
Okay, the breakout rooms are ready, so I'm going to go ahead and click open, and you guys should see the invitation to the breakout room shortly.
Awesome. And if everyone has any questions, please feel free to join the main room and ask away, or I can stay here for a little bit and take any questions about the activity.